change at the Numan Arms. I'm having coffee.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm having a green tea. How times have changed, eh?
Yeah, yeah. So, Roger, obviously you became part of the Numan band during the Telecon sort of, because you were on the Telecon album.
On the live album, yeah, the Hammersmith Odeon.
But you were on the actual album itself, which I seem to recall you couldn't remember that one either. But how did you get the gig for the Telecon tour in the UK?
That was, Gary was playing in Australia and we supported him on his East Coast tour. And he and I and the singer of my band, the band I was in, James Freud, they kind of got along, and we just had a single out, which is why we were doing the tour, the support tour, to promote a song called Modern Girl. And we were kind of like a synth pop band, you know. And so at the end of the tour, Gary suggested, he had been looking for a project, he'd been looking for someone to produce. So he suggested we come over to England and he produces. And so it became very political on our end of things as far as the internal relationship of the band. So it ended up only James and I went to England initially, and we went to Rock City, and Gary produced us. And it was just James and I with James' songs. But pretty quickly, and we're staying in James' caravan. And I think I might have mentioned some of this in the last interview. But we were staying in Gary's caravan at the back of his house when he was living with his mum and dad, and which is kind of quaint. And but it was good fun going into Rock City Studios. And I think Nick Smith might have been engineering that as well, because he was the engineer who did I Assassin,
yeah,
which was to come later. And then you're really pushing me with all this stuff, you know. I got to tell you, Steve, this is 40 years ago.
I know.
But anyway, it became pretty evident quite quickly that we were starting to sound like Gary. Gary has a very specific sound that he hears and he produces himself. And we were starting to sound like that. And he was starting to get James to sing like Gary, or whether he didn't force James to do that, but it kind of happened that way. And so James said to me one night, look, I don't think we can continue this. It's just doesn't sound like us anymore. And during that period, what was going to happen was the album was going to come out, and then we would do the support to Gary on another British and possibly European tour. And then the rest of our band would come out and play on the live show. So just James and I were doing the recording, but the rest of the band would join us on the UK leg supporting Gary. So it ended up, James decided to pull out of the recording. And so that kind of ruined all the plans going forward. James and the boys went back to, we were already rehearsing as well,
right,
at Noma Studios in Shepherd's Bush. So the rehearsals were the Numan's band during the day, and then at 6 o'clock at night, our band would come in until until midnight. And so, because I was going to be working in both bands, because Gary asked me to play in his band to replace Russell, I think. Russell.
Dennis Haynes, I would.
Sorry.
Yeah, it would have been Dennis Haynes at the time, yeah.
I'm getting them mixed up.
Oh, easily done.
And so, yeah, my work schedule was pretty heavy then. I think about that now, and I was learning a lot of new material back then, cramming everything into that time. But then when James pulled out, the boys went back to Australia, but I said, I'm going to stay on because Gary's asked, because I'm playing in the band. And so I promised Gary, and we've been rehearsing with him. So I said, I'll join you at the end of the UK tour, which is what happened.
Mm.
So I was in two minds, really. I had the gig with Gary, which was, pretty amazing stuff. We were doing big concert stages with a full-on concert production. And it was really exciting. And a European tour. And of course we did, Hammersmith Odeon, which was my dream since I was in my early teens.
Yeah.
And then, but I thought my loyalty was to the guys back in Australia. So we came back, and we actually, in the time that we spent in London, it was quite an interesting and fertile period of time. And we were influenced radically we just absorbed a lot of stuff. We went back home, went straight into rehearsing for a new album back there and writing material as a band. And it was a kind of a magazine slash slash what? Well, what was to become Blur.
Yeah.
It was a very forward-looking album that we'd left all the pop stuff behind. And so we presented it to the record company. We were really excited about it. We presented it to the record company. They hated it. They wanted the poppy stuff.
Right, okay.
And so James again said, oh, well, that's it. I'm just not going to carry on. I can't. I don't want to do the poppy stuff, and neither did any of us. But instead of just trying to work the problem, James went to England, and he said, you should come too. And I said, no, I'll stay here and see what I can make happen. And within about 2 months, I decided there is nothing for me back there.
Mm.
I regretted, of course, leaving England. So I went back there with no prospects. No, I ended up washing dishes at Jaguar, and then ended up working at the BBC props warehouse. And, 2 dead-end, completely dead-end jobs, barely called jobs. But I would rather do that at the time. And we were living in a bed sit, the three of us, in a below ground, completely mildewed out house, which was later what do you call it? Condemned. Yeah. And so, in fact, I'll if we're going to be talking about the tour, the American tour, at the end of that tour, I came back to London, and just before I got on the plane, my flatmate said, "Oh, that place that we were living in, it is no more. It's been destroyed." So he said, "I'm living on a mate's couch, so that's where you'll be coming back to." So it was a real fall back to earth,
But on the live, on the telly tour, when you start, because it started in the UK with you playing, obviously, you've got the instrumental piano bit at the beginning of Down in the Park, which was the first time that had been played in that way.
Right.
Can you remember how that came about? Was that your idea, Gary's idea, or just how did it come about?
I think I was messing about with it.
Right.
And I was messing about with it in the studio because that and Our Friends Electric, I think, are two of the classic songs of that era.
Mm.
They are so haunting and so memorable and so different and so atmospheric. And they have a sensibility about them. If you're writing a movie, if you're writing a score for a movie and you had to write a song that was dystopian, those two songs would be it.
Mm.
And they were beautifully conceived. And so I really loved those. And I was just messing about with it. And I think Gary said, came up to me and said, that sounds really good. Why don't you do the play-in? And so I did that at rehearsals, and that just became a standard thing, just a few flourishes and just taking the melody and the chords and just playing it in a lyrical manner, you know. And so
yeah, because I mean that Down in the Park is a completely, like I said, you've got the instrumental at the beginning, the piano, which is awesome, and then there was a completely different, now you've said it, arrangement of Our Friends Electric, which started off with just, rather than going straight into it, it's just a symphonic song, you know, doon 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 doon, you know what I mean? It's such a different arrangement of the whole song to start with.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. Yeah, I'd completely forgotten about that, actually, until you mentioned it. Look, there's something I should tell you, because instead of people probably think that I'm a bit vague, because after 40 years, you do get a bit vague on the details. But with a lot of these things that I do and I record, I never listen back to them. No. I never read interviews that I do. I never look at, I'll probably never watch this. Right. I never listen to albums I've recorded. I never listen to or watch films that I've done. It's just not what I do. It's kind of weird, I guess, but it's because largely it never sounds as good as when you're in the moment creating it, when you mixed it to your idea of what is perfection at that particular point in time, and you're happy with it, and listening to it through the studio monitors, and you just think that's great. And at any other point you hear it beyond that, it doesn't sound as good.
I know exactly what you mean, because when I wrote my book Backstage 10 years ago now, believe it or not, I've never read it. Do you know what I mean?
I do know. Yeah, because you've been through it. You've been through the whole creation process, so you know it better than anyone. It's in your head. You can recall it, all of that stuff, really, whenever you like. But yeah, it's a strange thing. I'm always looking forward to the next project, and so I spend very little time looking backwards. And that's why a lot of this stuff, when you asked me to do the interview about the US tour, I really had to think long and hard about what did happen. And it took me a while to reconstruct it, because, you know, it is 40 years ago.
It is, yeah.
And, a lot of things did happen. And it was a strange tour for a number of reasons. But I think it's partly because of that. It wasn't a cohesive tour. And I think part of the reason that I found it, I was struggling to put it all back together again, is because, in a sense, I thought it kind of best left in the past, some of it.
For many reasons.
Yeah. But and then trying to get the timeline of all the events that happened sequentially was another thing. Because I remember fragments, but then trying to put them in order was quite difficult, actually. Because
going from the Telly Tour, which was a big stadium sort of tour, the Assassin Tour became a very clubby sort of tour, didn't it? It was a lot smaller venues. I mean,
yeah. It was pared down significantly, and I think what happened was initial sales of I Assassin probably weren't as good as what they were hoping. When Tony put the tour together, I don't think the sales were as they'd hoped, and so it became obvious to them, I think, after we recorded I Assassin, there was a hiatus. And this is one of the other things that I had just recently remembered, was that the tour was kind of broken up into 3 blocks, because there were 2 periods of hiatus where we had to wait for things to reconfigure. Like after I Assassin, I remember we had a period of about for 6 weeks, I think. After I'd moved out of Gary's house when we were recording I Assassin, and I went back to living in Ealing Common, but did I tell you about him taking me flying in the Navajo?
No.
Oh, okay. That's kind of interesting. He said to me, "Do you want to go flying?" I said, "Yeah, love to." He said, "Do you like planes?" And I said, "Yeah, I do." He said, "All right, well, come on." So Blackbush Airport is not far from his place in Virginia Waters, I think it's called.
Yeah, yeah.
He's got that, he's got that mansion, or he had that mansion there, which I loved because it was like a this palatial mansion with a big U-shaped driveway with a busted-ass Corvette sitting in the driveway with a broken axle. So it was like a little bit of slum in amongst all of these other wealthy neighbours, which I really loved. And Gary had put his little mark there, you know, and it had been sitting there for months. He just hadn't got it repaired. And slumming it with a Corvette. I mean, that's kind of classy.
It is.
So anyway, he took us off to Blackbush, and he's got this 12-seater Navajo twin engine, which I'd never been. I'd only ever been on a plane twice before then. You know, I hadn't really gotten out and about. In fact, when we did the support tour in Australia for Gary, and we had to fly from Melbourne up to Sydney, that was the first time I'd ever been on a plane.
Really?
Yeah, when I was 22. I was 21 because after the Brisbane show, after the Sydney show, I went back to the hotel bar, and this guy heard me tell someone it was my 21st birthday. And he just bought me a bottle of Dom Perignon.
Really?
I'd never met the guy before. Still don't know who he is. He just said, "Congratulations." And off he went. But yeah, so anyway, Gary strapped me in, put on the headphones, we took off. Within about 500 feet, we were in cloud. And so I thought, oh, this is pretty cool. You couldn't see anything, couldn't see the ground, but it was great. It was all these dials, and it was so impressive and intimidating. And so we're flying around and zooming around and tight turns and everything. And everything is just a wall of grey. But I thought, well, he knows what he's doing. You know, I'm enjoying the ride. Well, I heard him talking on the radio, but I couldn't really understand what was going on. So I'm just looking at it's just so impressive, the whole thing. And he's really cool up there piloting this plane. I'm sitting in the co-pilot seat. And then I started to realize that he was going kind of quiet. And I said a couple of things, and he'd just say, "Not now." And I'm thinking, okay, well, it's just the two of us. Like, why not now? And so then I realized he was getting a bit nervous. And then it wasn't until he said to me, "If you see a hole in the clouds, let me know." Right. And that's when I got nervous. And so he's flying around doing orbit, and he didn't know where he was.
Right.
He had no idea.
Yeah.
And so I was looking out everywhere trying to find a hole in the clouds, and I saw this little patch of cloud, and it was funneling in. And I said, "There's one." And he just threw the plane into a dive, this big twin-engine 12-seater, into a dive. We went straight through this hole. It opened up. There's the ground 500 feet below, and he pulls it up like this. And we end up doing this big roller coaster thing with my stomach and my feet. And it was the most impressive thing I'd ever encountered. And I got down. I didn't realize how nervous he was until he got out of the plane. I could see his hand shaking.
Really?
Yeah, he had no idea. Yeah. So he asked me if I liked it, and I said, "Yeah, I did. I loved it." And he said, "You should get your license." And I said, "Oh yeah." Like I said, 2 months ago I was washing dishes at Jaguar, and he said, "Well, you're doing the tour, so why don't I just advance you your wages?"
Right.
And I said, all right.
How'd you do?
Around and sign me up.
Yeah.
And in the time it took when we finished I Assassin to when we started filming the video clip for the first single, I had done about half my training.
Really?
And so, yeah, I prepared for the American tour by getting my flying license. It was, crazy times. This whole period was so crazy. It was fantastic. And then we did the I Assassin. Oh, well, before that, that's right. I remember going around to the production office, and because we had to be fitted out for those white suits and fedoras, and Beryl was doing the wardrobe, and Tony was his manager. And so they were coming on the tour. And so it happened there. Oh, that's right. And I remember Gary met me in the car park, but he'd just had a hair transplant, and like the day before, and his head was like a soccer ball. I had no idea who he was.
Really?
Until he started talking. Yeah. I'd never seen anything like it. And, but it went down within a day or two. And so we were fitted out for the suits, and that's when we found out that Gary's brother, John, half-brother, was joining the band. And then we turned up. I had just met Chris, and of course I'd met Pinot in the studio. Pinot had been playing while I was there in the studio, so I met him. Rob Dean was still in LA, where he was based. So he was supposed to come over and record, but that didn't happen for some reason. So then we shot the video, which was that gangster-themed video for some. I forget which track it was.
Was it Music for Chameleons, that one? It was.
Oh, yeah. That's it. And then I think shortly after that, we did an appearance on Top of the Pops. And where I was playing one of those Moog Liberators, which I absolutely hated. But, you know, Gary was into the idea, so I just kind of did it. But, and so then we went into another hiatus while they confirmed all of the tour bookings for America. And so everything was kind of segmented. And that's why it was kind of hard to put it together in my head as to what event followed which other event. But anyway, we ended up going to LA, and Tony rented us a house. Gary lived in his own place, you know, an apartment with his girlfriend. I've forgotten her name now. And she was the dancer. She was nice. And we had this house up behind Tower Records, up in the Hollywood Hills, which kind of overlook Topanga Valley. And you get a lovely view of the smog at sunset, you know, at the end of the day. But it was a beautiful house, like nice 60s style house. In fact, I remember when we got in, we got the key, and it was about midnight. And we walked in, we were working through the house, you know, everyone's sort of picking their rooms. And then we see all these blue and red flashing lights everywhere. We walk out, and there's cop cars and private security, and they're all standing there. Tony walks out, and they thought there was a burglary because no one had told them that the house was being rented. And so they said, well, we knew there was something going on here because you guys were triggering every sensor in the house. You guys probably thought they had the Manson family or something. It was a great place. It had a pool. It was a really comfortable place. And coming from England in the middle of winter, my God, it was like a mecca. It was just really amazing. But Pinot and Chris and I stayed there. Rob had his own place to stay, and then Rob came up to the house, and I remember meeting him, and for the first time, and John stayed with us, and I think that's kind of where the tone kind of shifted in the band a bit. It's because I think what happened there was, well, you look at Chris Slade, you know, he was a drumming legend from the 70s, Uriah Heep and everything, and then Pinot was a rising star. He was recording with everyone and in high demand. Rob, of course, was a member of Japan. I came from a shitty little band in Australia, but I've been playing piano since the age of 4 and synthesizers for 10 years. So we're all, you know, passionate musicians who are dedicated to our craft. And I think what happened with the inclusion of Gary's brother being parachuted into the band, it changed the dynamic.
Right.
I think it went from being a rock band into something else. Because it's always, you know, it's hard to explain, but if you're in a band, everyone has this committed energy towards one goal. And so you're usually in a band because you admire the other guys and you're on a similar sort of level. But John, there was nothing to do with, it was not his fault at all. And I think I know why Gary did it. It's because at the time he was getting a lot of pressure, a lot of heat from the press. The album probably wasn't as successful as what he'd hoped. And he wanted his family and his close friends around him. And so I think that was partly why.
Yeah, probably.
But it wasn't, I have to say, it wasn't a good fit. And it kind of came to a head one day that compounded with something else that happened a bit later on. But we had this big old, like Lincoln Continental, where you could sit 4 people across each seat. You know, it's like they're massively wide things. A big 500 cubic inch V8, you know, big throbbing beast of a thing that Tony hired.
The convertible?
No, not a convertible.
Oh, okay, because there is the video of you lot going through LA in the convertible, like whether it's Music for Chameleons or a different one, but you're all there somewhere. I'll send you the link when I find it.
Yeah, I'd like to see that. I have no recollection of that.
Oh yeah, that's there somewhere.
Okay. And so, but that was the car that we used. It was like a, you know, 10-year-old car, something like that. That we used to get to and from rehearsals, because the rehearsal studio was in, wasn't East LA, but it was probably like Silver Lake, somewhere around there. So it was at the other end of Sunset. It was about a half-hour drive each way, 20-25 minutes each way. And because we were up behind where Tower Records used to be, in a place called Birdland. You know, all the streets have these names like Lyrebird Avenue and Sparrow Avenue, and I think we were in Nightingale Avenue. And so it was just a long
Perkins Palace, where you rehearsed. Perkins Palace.
Sorry, say again.
It was Perkins Palace, wasn't it? Where you rehearsed, or something like that.
Oh, Perkins Palace. I think, wasn't that the venue in Pasadena?
No, I thought it was LA. But
Was
I could
it?
be wrong. I could be wrong.
Yeah, look, I could be wrong too. I just could be talking absolute shit, you know.
But sorry, go on.
I'm just telling you, yeah, kind of the way I remember it. You might be completely right. But so we rehearsed in this this ample space, and Gary came down, and but I noticed there was a bit of a shift in Gary. He was a bit more, dare I say, well, he was tense.
Mm.
There was I don't know, he used to walk around with a baseball bat. And it was just something was a little bit different, like he was a bit insecure.
Yeah.
And I think he also got a bit caught up in the gun culture there.
Mm.
And he bought himself a few guns. He was quite proud of them, and was like some more toys that he could add to the toy box, you know. But it was a bit disconcerting, I have to admit, to everyone. No one liked the idea of having guns in the studio.
Mm.
He used to carry a little Beretta pistol around with him. And so, anyway, we did the rehearsals, and it was all coming together quite well. And then one day, Tony came up to the house and said, I want you guys to pay petrol money on the car. And so Chris said, well, we shouldn't have to do that. That's a tour expense. And Tony said, well, the tour is costing us more money than what we had thought, and so we're just asking you to kick in. And Chris said, well, we're not sharing in the profit, so why should we share in the expenses? And it got a little bit, I wouldn't say heated, but a little bit, you know, people were making their voices heard. I kind of abstained at that point. Then after Tony left, Chris and Pinot said, what do you think? And I said, well, it's not that much. I mean, in those days, petrol was like 30 cents a litre.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, it's nothing.
I know.
But they said, yeah, but it's the principle, you know.
Which it is.
And you know, I could see both points of view.
Mm.
But I ended up saying, yeah, well, okay, fair enough. It is a tour expense. It's not ours to worry about. So the next morning, before we drove off to rehearsals, we got a phone call from Gary saying, don't leave for rehearsals, I'm coming over. So he came over and he walked in, and I could tell something was up straight away. And so he had his baseball bat with him, and he's sort of, you know, rolling it around in his hand, and he says, I heard what you guys were, I heard you guys are complaining. And Chris and Pinot said, what do you mean? And he said, you don't want to pay the petrol money, and for everything we've done for you, blah, 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 blah. And then it just started this argument, and Gary got quite heated, and he just made his opinion felt and then left. And so what it did was it created a tone in the band, and it really started a division that, and what it was, we were having these soft discussions to ourselves at night, the three of us, Pinot, Chris and I. John, we thought, was in the bedroom, but he had been listening and told Gary. Oh. And so straight away, it's like, oh man, you know, this isn't how bands are supposed to work. and so it turned into something a little bit odd. And that's pretty much where the tension started.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah. And so everything kind of settled down and things went back to normal. Everyone was completely fine with each other. And then Tony came in one day and said, oh, look, we can't, we're going to have to go into hiatus again because we've had some dates change. We've had to readjust the schedule. We've had to readjust the budget. So until it gets sorted, everyone just down tools for, I think it was about 6 weeks.
Right.
And so he said, so you guys just go off and do your own thing and we'll regroup in 4 to 6 weeks' time. So I didn't think too much of it. I wasn't that worried.
Mm.
I thought it would be a good opportunity to go back to Australia because I hadn't seen my folks for 3 years. And so in the meantime, Gary asked me if I wanted to come up, that's right, to come up to Edwards Air Force Base because the space shuttle was landing.
All right.
And I guess it was the second one, I think. It might have been the second one that they flew.
Probably, yeah.
Or it might have been the first one even. And so I would have gone, but then I'd already decided to see my folks. So I'd already told them. So I went back home. And then we did regroup. And then the way I remember it is that we played at, I thought it was Perkins Palace in Pasadena. Let's just say it was a venue.
It could be. I could be wrong.
It was a concert size. It was a concert size stage and gig, and it was a full production rehearsal. So we had the crew, we had a full lighting rig, and eventually had a dress rehearsal. And so we did that, and I think Nash the Slash, which was Gary's cousin or second cousin.
No, he wasn't. No, he was from Toronto, Nash. But Nash was from Toronto, wasn't he? He's not related to Gary.
I thought there was. Okay. Well, he was supporting Wall of Voodoo, who was supporting us.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah. And so that's the first time I met the guys from Wall of Voodoo, and who I went on to play with later. But then after that show, we hit the road, and Tony had told us a couple of days before that we were no longer having a tour bus. We're having a Winnebago. And so we're going to be touring America in a Winnebago. So things are already sort of like scaling down much more than what we'd anticipated. And, you know, to everyone's credit, they just rolled with it. They said, oh, wow. But it kind of had a Partridge Family vibe, you know, where you've got mum and dad up the front, Gary and the girlfriend and John, and you've got the bad boys down the back smoking pot.
On the naughty seats.
Yeah, the naughty thing, yeah. And, but we'd been driving for a day and a half, and I think I have no idea where the first gig was, but I know we had to travel a long way to get there. And it was about 2 o'clock in the morning, and I think we were in Wyoming. It could have been Utah, going through that corner between Nevada and Wyoming. And we heard all this yelling, and I think I was asleep at the back. And I woke up and I could smell all this smoke. There was all this smoke in the cabin. And then the bus abruptly pulled off the road. And I pulled open the curtain, and it was just nothing out there. Nothing. We're in the high country of that part of the world. And it was snow. And so we were like 2 o'clock in the morning, something like that. And we came out the back, out of the naughty room, and they were evacuating the bus and pulling all this stuff off, and there were flames coming up from the front of the engine. And we got out of the van, and there's all this yelling and chaos, and I just remember it being incredibly cold, like really, really cold. And it was just a black night, and there was nothing around us, and on this country road. And then everyone's shouting, they don't know what to do. And there was this light on. There was about 400 meters away. And it was down like this farmhouse road. And so I bolted towards that because I thought they'll have a phone. And I ran as fast as I could to this house. Before I got there, I was just heaving because, it's like when you come from a really warm environment into really, really frigid, cold night air, it just burns your lungs. And it was also high altitude, so there was no oxygen. And I banged on this door where the lights were on. And this guy came to the door, and he just opened it up a crack. And he's looking out, and I'm trying to get out the words saying, "Fire, our Winnebago's on fire." And I just couldn't get it. And this other guy came up, and they looked like they were expecting trouble.
Right.
And I'm just trying to say, "Fire, fire, phone, I need a phone." So they let me in. No, a woman, that's right, a woman opened the door and let me in, but they were all really suspect of me. It's 2:00 in the morning. But these guys are all up, and then I walked in the room, and it's this illegal drinking sort of hole. And that's when I realized what was going on. I didn't work that out until much later, but I managed to call, and the fire engine came out. And then by the time I made it, ran back to the bus, the front of it had been burnt out of Winnebago. So we then had to sit and wait for a couple of taxis, I think they sent out from the nearest town. And we stayed in a hotel waiting for a tour bus to arrive. So eventually the real tour bus arrived. And then we started to feel a bit more like a band again.
Right.
So that's what happens when you're trying to cut costs on a big...
Almost seems like it was doomed from the start, that one. Because
it kind of was. It kind of was. It was just... There were so many incidents like that where you just thought, oh, we weren't meant to be here.
No, because I remember talking to one of Gary's guys from the original Tour and Principal Telly Tour, not in the band, but he was in LA, and Gary had rang him and said, "Can you come and, I'd like you to come and do the sound for me, because the guy I've got is no good." So he goes to meet Gary, and as you were saying, Gary's sitting there twirling a gun around in his hand. And even he said everything seemed wrong, So he said, "I'm not doing it," and walked out, basically, because he just said everything seemed wrong about the whole thing. Yeah.
In fact, what happened was at the Pasadena, at the production rehearsal on the concert stage, Gary had his Beretta with him, and he came into the dressing room. He was pointing it at us and, bang. And we're saying, "Hey, man, just cool it. Just don't point that." And he did the same thing on stage with the crew.
Really?
The crew went up to Tony and they said, "If he doesn't get rid of that pistol, we're walking off the job." And so it was, the whole thing was just, it was weird. I think Gary was going through a weird phase. And I think it was a bit of paranoia. I'm not sure why.
Probably. But going back to the Telly Tour, you've done the instrumental part at the end of Every Day I Die, which was, again, the arrangement from the Tour and Principal with Billy Currie was completely different. completely different. The solo bit towards the end was just something you came up with or just improvised on the day, or any recollection of that?
Yeah, look, I think, look, I remember doing it, and I think at the period, I half remember doing it.
Yeah,
if I'm honest. There was just a lot of, when you're locked in the studio for hours and days on end, one day merges into another one. I think it's just one of those things where Gary said, do a solo. And I was a bit of a Rick Wakeman tragic in that I learned my rock and roll chops from prog rock. And then I had to scale them down to meet the expectations of new wave, you know. So I was a bit overqualified in some way.
Yeah. So
I also had a classical bent, which is why I ended up doing film scores. But so I think it's a combination of those influences. It's a bit of Yes meets Peter Gabriel meets. I was also a big fan of Billy Currie. Billy Currie was one of my heroes. So it's just, I think it was just an amalgam of trying to do something a little melodic, and
it worked
rather than just a widdly prog rock lick. I wanted to make it something. I remember doing that. And I remember that's what I always tried to do. I didn't want to just be like a heavy metal or a synth. Look how fast I can play and pitch bend and do all that stuff. I always came from a melodic sensibility, I think. And so that I think that just kind of was a direction that just sort of fell out of me.
But then did you find from like obviously you done the UK telly tour, and I think Dennis Haynes took over in America, but the telly tour came to a bit of an abrupt end as well. So obviously there's that was in 1980. So 1982 you're back with Gary on the Assassin tour, but it's a completely different sound, isn't it? And a completely different band. I mean, obviously you played in the band with Gary and Chris and Russell and everyone. So you're suddenly in America doing a completely different sound with a completely different band. Did that take a bit of working out, or just it worked sort of?
It did work. It sounded not unlike the previous band, and I think that's probably testament to Pinot rather than anyone else, because I went into the rehearsals in LA already knowing the back catalogue, and I played on the I Assassin album, so it became very easy for me to rehearse. Pinot, I think, had to unlearn a bit in order to play the original stuff before he did I Assassin, because I Assassin is in a sense Pinot's record. He put his stamp all over that in such a indomitable fashion, and he of course had to play down in order to do the other material. But I do remember, now that we're talking about it, I do remember Gary encouraging him to play up in a few of the songs, so that he had a bit of ownership over some of them. I can't remember which ones, but I remember that Pinot did get to play out a bit, because he had some fans. You know, Pinot had some fans in America. His word traveled fast with the his Paul Young Association, with Joan Armatrading and Jules Holland and all of that stuff. It traveled across the Atlantic. In fact, Pinot and I remember a big night out we had in New Orleans, where he had always wanted to go to Bourbon Street. And Bourbon Street I went there recently, and it was very disappointing. It was just a shadow of its former self, but back then it was rocking. And it had upwards of, I don't know how many, but it seemed like there would have been at least 50 clubs in a very small area, all like shop fronts, all next to each other. And some of them were open to the street, some of them had an open door and you just paid $5 to get in. And all the jazz legends were playing, the jazz and blues legends, they were all there. They were, if you were a blues player, an R&B player, a jazz player, you played New Orleans, you played Bourbon Street.
Yeah.
It wasn't just a tourist gig, it was part of your, as part of what you did. It was a regular earner. Then you go off and play other gigs around the country. But Bourbon Street was a big deal. And so I remember Pinot was heavily into R&B and American music, much more than I was. And he was just like a little kid in a toy shop, just seeing all of these people who had been heroes of his when he was a kid, performing live in front of him. He couldn't believe it. And then we just go from club to club to club to club. And within a few hours, after a couple of hurricanes, which is their traditional drink there, I have no idea how the end of that night went. I have no recollection whatsoever. But I remember that night right up until that point.
Yeah, up until that point.
Hurricane, I thought, this is a really good night. Very inspiring, like really incredible. But we did this, we did another gig in Chicago where Psychedelic Furs were supporting us. And I remember their bass player came up to us, and I think Pinot bought something to smoke off him from memory. And probably a Marlboro or something like that.
Yeah.
And they were just about to go on stage, and he was legless, not Pinot, the bass player. Absolutely legless, like he was completely gone. You could barely understand what he was saying. He could barely walk. And Pinot said to me, do you want to have a toke on this? And normally I wouldn't before a show. There was something about what was going on at that time that I just had a couple of puffs, you know. So I'm standing by the side of the stage, and I was at the front, and Psychedelic Furs came on, and I thought, oh, this is going to be interesting, because when I saw the bass player, this did not look workable. Then they were amazing, and he was amazing, and he was strutting around the stage and posing, and they were rock solid. It was well impressive. And so at the end of the set, Tony came up to me and he said, okay, half an hour on. And I realized just how stoned I was. And I thought, oh no, this is not good. This is Pinot came up to me and I said to him, are you stoned? And of course, that was his natural state. He loved to play like that. And I said, are you stoned? And he said, oh yeah, man. Oh yeah, man. He was like grinning at me in the ear. He was in his happy place. And me, I'm full of paranoia, and the whole gig, I didn't look at the audience the whole night. I'm watching my hands to make sure I didn't do anything uncoordinated. And it was a terrifying gig, that one, for me. And Pinot was it's probably the most enjoyable gig of the entire tour for me. But,
oh, that's brilliant.
Yeah. Oh, we had another one, actually, in Detroit. You probably heard about this one.
Hello.
We were playing Iggy. We were supporting Iggy. Iggy was on quite a bit later. And this is Iggy home country, you know, so it was quite amazing to be playing on the same stage as him. But I remember going back to the hotel, and Gary was kind of cowering downstairs in the bar. And he said, I said, what are you doing down here? And he said, Iggy's trying to find me. And he said, I was in my room. He's like he said, it's like a maniac. He's like trying to kick my door in. So, Gary, come out. I know you're in there. I want to talk to you. Come on. He's kicking the door. And he said, I know, I'm standing behind the door with my baseball bat. And I'm just sort of waiting for him to come through the door. I said, you should have let him in. I'd have let him in.
Yeah.
Yeah. And meanwhile, and then I went upstairs to my room, and this is another example of the craziness that was on this tour. I went up to my room, and I had one of those electronic key cards that had just come onto the market. And so, you know, we're in a pretty nice hotel, and I put the key card into the lock, and it was clicking, but it wasn't opening. I was trying the handle and tried it about 2 or 3 times. And then I looked at the number, because the key cards don't have your room number on them.
No, they don't know.
No, so I looked at the room, I thought, oh, that's last night's room. Then the last place we're in. So I walked down the hall, about 3 doors down on the other side, and that was my room. So, yep, sure enough, it opens, I walk in. 10 minutes later, I got a call. No, there's a knock on the door. And, oh no, that's right. Before I opened the door, this fella comes out of the room, and he said, you're trying to bust into my room. I said, no, and sorry, no, it was a mistake. I thought that was my room, but this is my room. He said, you're trying to bust into my room. And I could tell that the guy was like really out of it, and really, he was getting quite aggressive. And then his girlfriend came out, and she started saying, call the police, this guy's trying to, bust into our room. I said, look, it was an honest mistake. You know, I explained that, you know, it was the night before, that was my room, and this is my room tonight. And so these guys were like, I'm sure they were doing crack or something. And so, because they were just wild and really wild-eyed. And so I thought, I can't talk to these guys. I'm just going to shut the door and let it go away. Well, I got a knock on the door about 10 minutes after that, and it was hotel security. And they came up because they said, we've had a complaint. You tried to bust into someone's room. And so I had to go through the whole thing.
Yeah.
But this guy was, I could tell he was more attuned to the other guys than he was to me.
Yeah.
This guy with stage makeup on and and spiky black hair, and, you know, I could tell which way, you know, he was leaning. And the door to my room was open, and these guys came in and said, that's him, that's the guy who tried to bust into our room. Yeah. And so this guy is trying to swings at me in my room, and his wife is around the other side of this fella who's just holding them back like this, but not all that interested in, you know, really trying to block the punches. So I was sort of saying, hey, do you want to take care of this? So this guy left the room, and he said, I'm going to kill you, man. I'm going to fucking kill you. So I don't know if I'm allowed to say that on your channel.
Sure.
So then the whole time in Detroit, I kept on checking the hallway before I walked out of the room. And I remember talking to one of the guys in the crew, and I said, do you want to walk down with me? Because I think these guys mean business, and the security, I got the inkling the security aren't going to sort of back me up. He said, yeah, I'll walk you down when the time comes. Well, he never turned up. And so I'm walking down by myself, just looking into every shadow and every corner and jumping at everything, you know.
That's brilliant.
So it was, it was fun times.
Yeah.
Fun time.
I think sometimes, although in its own madness things aren't going quite right, when you look back on things, you can actually see not everything was as bad as it was, because there's brilliant times as well. If you see what, well, as you're saying, really, I mean, yeah.
Look, we still had fun in between those times.
Yeah.
And when I say it was tense in the band, it's just one of those things where we're all used to working in a sort of a unit of, there's a camaraderie there, and that camaraderie wasn't really there.
No,
because the situations I've outlined, and it was kind of the band and the family. And because the gigs weren't selling very well, there was one gig, I think we had about 1,000-seater, that they actually put a curtain halfway through, blocked off half the gig, which was just not a good look.
No.
Been better almost just to leave it half empty, and I think Gary ended up losing a lot of money on that tour.
Well, he did lose a lot of money.
Yeah. Have we got time for another story?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Okay. Have you heard about the riverboat?
Yeah.
Casino?
No, all I know is you done a riverboat. That's all.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, that was I think they used to put the casinos on riverboats then in order to either circumvent regulation or tax, one or the other. But you go into these beautiful old paddle steamers, and the inside is just full of bling, just crap tables and poker tables and slot machines and stuff. But they had a decent sized stage there. It wasn't a concert stage, but it was like a large club stage. And so, but it was kind of cool playing on a riverboat going down the Mississippi. But we had arrived, we'd done sound check, and we had, the gig was about to start in like 15 minutes or something. And so Gary, part of the reason that we had the suits was because Gary had an excuse to wear a hat the whole time on stage. So the fedoras covered up the hair plugs, Yeah. It's a completely practical reason.
Yeah.
And so this particular time, Gary said to his mum, where's my hat? And she said, oh, I didn't bring it. I've left it in the van, in the bus. And he said, you stupid cow, how are you going to do that? And she said, I'll just walk back, just go back and get it. He said, we're halfway down the Mississippi. You can't just walk back and get the hat. And so he starts like really berating her. She's, feeling really bad. And so Tony then had to go out into the audience, and he's trying to buy a hat from
really.
They wouldn't give it up except for one guy who I think it cost him $100,
right,
for a trucker's cap. And so Gary had to wear that on stage. And I think also on that stage that night, the power went out to the PA.
Right.
And I think it kept on dropping out of the monitors as well. And I think we actually had to stop at one point. The power just couldn't handle all of the keyboards and amps and everything on stage. And it just
sounds like a weird gig.
Pardon?
It sounds like a weird gig on a boat.
It was a weird gig.
Back in the day, anyway. Another
one of those weird vibes that just thought, oh, well, just everyone just rolled with it, as you do. But yeah, that was a memorable one. The tension that was created, and it was largely between Chris and Gary.
I know.
Yeah, and culminated in us playing a gig somewhere in the Midwest, and we came off stage, and I was usually the last one to come off stage because I'd wait for everyone to clear their path, and I'd be making little adjustments or whatever in case we had to do an encore.
Right.
And I think this was after the encore. And so I came off stage and heard all this shouting and commotion. And apparently what had happened was Gary had confronted Chris and said he played like shit, or he missed a cue, or he played out of time or something.
Mm-hmm.
And an argument ensued, and then Chris tried to get around him. Gary blocked his way. So Chris pushed him in the chest, pushed him up against the wall. Tony got involved, and there was lots of chests being pushed out. And so I got there at the tail end of it, unfortunately. So I only saw the aftermath. But then Chris was going to leave the tour and blah, blah, blah. And I think Tony talked to him once everyone had calmed down. Chris agreed to finish off the rest of the tour, of which I think we're already 2/3 of the way through.
Right.
So it was, and it was all of that tension that had started with the petrol money. That was really a catalyst for everything, and things just compounded as we went through. And so it was kind of like a truce where everyone was just pretending everything was fine until those moments. I think Gary was getting more tense and more insecure as the tour went through, as he saw that the people weren't filling the venues, and the album hadn't done as well as he'd hoped. So combination of all of those things, I think, and it just kind of ebbed to a finish, to a close.
Yeah.